I'm here with the one and only Jonathan Selzer. I mean, I could give you a huge introduction, but I'm going to let you do the introduction yourself. Let the folks know what you've been up to, what do you do. I'm sure a lot of people already know, but just for those that are a little bit behind with the times, one of the most iconic voices in the world of metal today. And I don't
Well,
mean that as a singer. I mean that as a
yeah,
critic.
no one ever wants to hear me sing. I just judge people who do. So if you don't know, I'm the reviews editor of Metal Hammer. Been doing that like since 2007. Before that, I was the editor of Terrorizer magazine, which was back then one of the biggest extreme music magazines there was, really. And um, and then before that, I was I've been doing this since '89. Like, been writing for magazines since 1989. It's ridiculous. I was at Melody Maker, which, if you don't know, it was the big rival to NME. So it's more of an indie magazine. But when I started reading it when I was a kid, it got me into like industrial and metal, as well as like stuff like My Bloody Valentine and Throwing Muses and Pixies and Dead Can Dance. So, bands that metalheads love that aren't metal. So that was kind of all a good introduction to Terrorizer. And my predecessor at Terrorizer was a guy called Nick Terry, and he came into the metal scene not as a born metalhead, but kind of through the more left field, noisy indie scene. And yeah, we brought that kind of a little bit of that sensibility to Terrorizer. And yeah, and just for me, it's always music's always been about broadening horizons and discovering stuff and finding new ways to describe things and learning about yourself through music. And I've been managing to do that since 1989. Bloody hell. I don't even want to calculate how long that is.
Let's not do the math. It's going to make us
Yeah.
feel very old. Let's not do the math. So we're here today to do a little bit of a year-end in review. Me and you had talked about this several times, and we never got to do it. But when I saw you this year in Norway at Inferno, I said, okay, this year we got to sit down and just kind of go through some of our favorite albums of the year, some of our biggest disappointments, and then those stories that made headlines. So starting off with albums of the year, the first one that you
Yeah.
mentioned to me was also an album that blew me away by how good it was, and that's Blood Incantation with Absolute Elsewhere.
Yeah, it blew everyone away. And I could see like some people think like they've kind of blown up. I remember when the album came out, they were trending on Twitter. And I think for some people, maybe they think this is one of the biggest metal releases of the year. Seems to come out of nowhere. But I could see something brewing, like earlier on this year. Like, the album. When did the album come out? Like about a month ago.
Yeah, it was. I believe it was an October release.
Yeah. So there was something brewing with this band, and you know, people were really into like the two previous albums. One was a death metal album, straightforward but kind of proggy, and there was a lot of kind of weird metal going on, especially like during and in the wake of the pandemic. Like, I'm not saying that they were deliberately caused by the pandemic, but people were much more tuned to the weirdness, like bands like Oranssi, Pazuzu, Black Dot, Buddha Rising, Nibiru, like and bands like Imperial Triumphant. That somehow the weirdness of this kind of weird rewire your brain music was really hitting home after the pandemic. And then they put out was it Time Wave Zero,
Yeah,
the ambient album, and it kind of made sense that this is like the flip side to the coin. And then I went to Roadburn this year, which is less of a rock festival, metal festival than it used to be. And they did two sets. They did one death metal set, one Time Wave Zero set, and like it wasn't full of metalheads. It was kind of like it was a mixture of hipsters and everything. And there were more people at those two gigs, separate gigs, than there was for any other band. Like Chelsea Wolfe, who you'd think would be the signature artist at Roadburn, and like you literally could not move in this 3,000 capacity venue. And so they'd really touched a nerve, like in the metal scene and beyond. And this album came out and it fused the two of them together, but just so seamlessly and such a whole and so evocatively that everyone just like lost their shit and like this is kind of what we need right now.
To give you an idea, I'm going to be seeing them on November 30th in Toronto. The show sold out. I'm going to say within the first week that the tickets went on sale.
Mm.
Their North American tour is selling out everywhere. Their rise to fame, it might seem like you said, it might seem like it's something that just happened like almost in a vacuum recently, but I think they've kind of been paving the way to what this album offers, which I feel like this album is a little bit of a mixture of what the two last records kind of had, but now it's becoming a little bit more of a hybrid record. Uh, I don't know. I've talked to the guys. I don't know how their brain is wired because I honestly cannot understand how a person can think of music in that format and then think of it and then create it. Because one thing is to think of it, the other thing is to create it. The album is it's really one of the greatest records of the year in my opinion as well. And I'm excited to see the not just a niche group of people that really appreciate it, but it's become really broad in terms of the amount of people that have gravitating around this record.
Yeah, there's a real like emotional resonance to it, and it's almost there's something very like when I said it's like there's 3,000 people at each at both gigs at Roadburn, and there feels something very communal about it, like it's drawing you to it, like some like one of those like some 70s sci-fi film where like some glowing orb has appeared, and everyone's just like, "What is this?" And they're all just like drawn towards this orb, not knowing what it is.
Yeah,
And
and it plays really well. Actually, the whole sci-fi thing really plays off of well of their music and they create this. They create almost this psychedelic experience, but through sound, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, and and there's a kind of a history of this of like 70s psychonauts like Terence McKenna or Philip K. Dick, just wired to all these kind of weird kind of like sort of terrestrial and extraterrestrial correspondences and just like this is it's kind of an album where like because it fits together so well these separate elements as a whole. It's because there seems to be like a real grand vision behind it. Like like you can't make a record like this unless you're actually kind of living in that world, and it's almost like a kind of a sort of frazzled conspiracy theorist world of just like putting this and that together and kind of believing in aliens and but also just there's this sense of like like when our sort of culture feels like it's really atrophying and we're like stuck in these little information bubbles and siloed off and um there's a sense of like a grand out there to which we all belong that feels like a real counter argument to what's going on in the world around us, and I think people just feel an instinctive need for it and get really drawn to it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, I'm going to pick a couple. We're not going to go through the whole list, but I'm going to pick some of your choices.
Mm,
Some because I agree with them. One because I honestly, you need to explain to me what you see in this band because I'm yet to find anything worth listening to. And then I'm going to
right,
give you
I'll do
one
my
of
best.
mine. So the next one I
Okay.
want to mention is Mura because both you and I
Yeah.
were part of the judges that gave these guys the first prize at the Wacken Metal Battle Iceland back in 2022. We obviously saw the potential and we saw the quality in the band. So I almost feel like this album coming out this year, I feel like we're kind of like co-producing this record to a certain degree. You know what I mean? Like I feel so invested into this album, considering we were there when they were just taking their first steps.
Well, remember they came on like there's been about 4 or 5 bands before then,
Mhm.
and they came on, and within 30 seconds, all right, that's it.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
the one.
It
Like
was
like
you, me, and Gunnar. We're all next to one another, and we're like, okay, these guys are winning. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're winning. Like, there's no
yeah,
even question.
yeah. There was like one person who voted it as number two, and it's like, what are you doing? It's just like, but there always has to be one like some kind of like low key figure. Just everyone's just like worshiping Baldur, and there's one person that's like, hey,
Yeah.
but they made it number two, but it's just like, well, it's just like, but it just shows like when a band comes out that's kind of like really unique and really doing their own thing, it really shows, and it really shows up against everything else that's going on around you.
Are you
Um,
surprised that it took them this long to release their debut record from that point?
um, I'm not surprised because only because I know that I think loads of labels were after them, that there was just this buzz around them. And people can tell when you've got something like, it kind of happened with Unto Others, not that they, went mega or anything. But so I'm not surprised that it took this long. I'm just surprised that it came out right at the end of the year. So it's kind of in this it's just kind of in this weird limbo where it came out too late for for at least the print magazines to vote for it in the albums of the year. And of course it's not going to come out and it's going to come out too early to be voted for the albums of the year for 2025. But it feels like there's kind of this last minute like reprieve and wonder that this album's come out. And I don't even know what genre to call it,
No,
but
I'm with you. I called it progressive because I mean I think that's the only genre that you can kind of fit it in because it's not anything. It's its own thing.
yeah. And yeah, it's got its own kind of set of dynamics. There's something a bit space rocky about it. Like the guy who makes the guitar look really cool. Like he holds it like part of a back cape out to the side. And so when you see him live with the guitar and he's just holding it like out to the side, and it's just like, okay, we're not in Kansas anymore, And then you just it's just I think when you reviewed it for the podcast and you said it's like a journey, and it really is. And yeah, it's just a journey. I don't know what it's a journey through. I know we're not saying anything much concrete about this record, and it's not like it's a really emotional journey like some of the other records I've probably chosen this year. But I guess in the same way that like Blood Incantation, it just opens a space up that you didn't know was there, and you can explore it, but you really need this space. It it does that. I don't know if there's something uniquely Icelandic about it in the sense that the best Icelandic bands, they have this sense of alienness that comes with the landscape, I guess, and comes with being snowed in for like half the year, and half your country being uninhabitable. And so you've got this kind of like this vastness beyond you that you can't really get to. So you kind of, I don't know if that sparks your imagination, but yeah, that it's a really unique, expansive record. And if I'd played it more often, I'd have maybe be able to pick out a few more reference points. But
Yeah, for me, the journey aspect of it was for me, there's three kinds of journey. There's the journey where you're looking forward to the destination, so it's about getting to where you want to go. There's the journey
mm,
where you appreciate the moment you're in and you're looking, imagine you're on a train and you're looking outside and there's different sceneries with every passing minute, and that aspect of the journey is something that you can hold on to. And then there's the other aspect of the journey, which is a little bit more interiorized by the person who's taking it's not about where you're going, it's not about the moment, it's just about the movement and the growth that comes with that movement. And I think this album is neither of the three, but it's at the same time all of them. So
yeah,
it's really weird from that standpoint.
yeah. I mean, it's not quite like Blood Incantation through the Stargate,
No.
but there's kind of an element of it. But it just feels like I like records that just give you like a space to explore, like kind of like you're playing Mist or Riven or something, and you're trying to work out how does this work. And but it feels, but again, it feels like like the Blood Incantation album, it feels really accommodating at the same time. It's not like really avant-garde or anything.
No, it's not
It's
very jarring at all. It still makes the listener feel very welcome in that experience.
Yeah, so I like that sense of like you kind of journeying through into the unknown, but you still feel accommodated by it. I get that off like certain jazz records sometimes. Like,
Well, there's a little bit of jazz in their sound as well, especially on this album. I really felt that. Now, you got to help me out with this one, dude.
okay,
Oranssi, Pazuzu. What? I know they're one of your favorite bands. What do you
yeah,
see in these guys that I'm like I cannot listen to more than 30 seconds of the first song on the album, and I had to like go grab a coffee and say, okay, that's not for me. And I've tried every album. I've tried every album.
Yeah, I mean, it's like having brain worms, isn't it? It's like some worms like eating your brain. And there's this kind of repetition to it that really kind of pulls you into the world. I think they described it. I'd interviewed them around the last album, It Stars in Kinski, which I'm horrifically mispronouncing. And they said it's like watching a painting, but a painting with the hands coming out to grab you. And so it feel so so the music has this real kind of traction to it. Like it's really drawing you into some place you're not really sure you want to go, like into like some kind of like into some kind of bad trip. And but but bad trips can be the most absolutely illuminating experiences you can have. And so the first four albums are all about talking about going like this kind of like sense of like outer space. And and then from like the last three or four albums, they've kind of gone into like describing inner space. And this one, the new one, Muntaja, is like the most darkest realms. It's like going into like the darkest, bottomless realms of the psyche, like where these kind of like weird, exotic, deep sea creatures exist. And it's gnarly. It's so gnarly, this new one. And I find it just like I just find it like endlessly fascinating. Like it almost exists. It like it doesn't like almost it doesn't need human beings to exist. It exists completely on its own terms. But at the same time, it's like it's burrowing into your psyche. And I love the ritualism of it. I love the repetition of it. Like I they're one of the bands, like them and Meshuggah, the two bands that I absolutely lose my shit to. And there's a sense of like something kind of taking you over, especially with this album. And like it's just these weird sort of like go to these weird sort of cavernous realms where like there are these weird chants that are just like relaying sort of subconscious instructions to you or something. And it's yeah, I find it's like I psychologically really need it, this kind of ritualism and this sense of like mixture of horror and wonder and being completely taken out of yourself, but also kind of something alien taking over. Is this I get a similar thing with Meshuggah, where like it feels like something alien's been injected into your blood system, but your body's reacting in a completely human way. And I always said just like also get a really emotional response to it. In the same and I explained it like with in the feature that I wrote that it doesn't things don't have to be intrinsically emotional to give you an emotional response. Like is a supernova intrinsically emotional? No, but you're going to get this complete sense of awe when you watch it, or
Mhm.
you know you're witness to it. So it's this kind of this sense of awe and wonder and darkness, and it's like this trigger, like how are you going to react to it? This kind of alien thing that's been injected into you, and like all responses are completely valid. Like your probably sense of horror is exactly, it's almost it's totally as valid as
And
my
that's
sense
exactly how I
of
feel. I feel like when I listen to their music, I'm in a horror movie, but the horror is that I cannot understand exactly what's causing the horror, which makes it even more horrifying because
yeah.
because it's not visible, it's not palpable, it's not something that you can put your hands around. So it's like this almost absolute chaos. And it's like chaos, it's like a black hole that's collapsing on me, and I just can make heads or tails of what's happening. And I have a very hard time feeling anywhere comfortable within it. And sometimes feeling uncomfortable is a good thing in music, but in their case, it's just like you're putting my brain through a blender. Like, what are you doing to me right now? That's kind of how
Right.
I feel.
See, I don't think it's chaos. Like there's a real method to it. Like I said, that repetition, that traction they've got. I think like kind of like M and Ra, they play just behind the beat, so it just really kind of pulls you along. And so one of my favorite quotes was about someone wrote about a book called The Age of Wire and String by Ben Marcus, which is a really weird book. And it said, I'm not sure if I understand it, but it understands itself. And so that's the whole thing. Like like you've got your own intelligence and you're trying to match it up against this kind of weird alien intelligence. And just think of him in the same way like you think of Meshuggah. Meshuggah seems like it's music for aliens. Like it's not meant for human bodies. And I think if you can get your head around Meshuggah, and again that weird sort of coldness to it, but really groovy. I mean, Oranssi Pazuzu got that kind of weird coldness to it, but really groovy. But it's just a lot more primordial, especially this album. Like the previous album was the first for Nuclear Blast, and it was a good starting off point because it was a lot more stripped down, but still really experimental, and it kind of took you off and. And but this one, it's not really an entry point. It's just like, well, you're just down the wormhole now. You find your way out or through it.
Yeah, but I think for me, it's they're going to be a band that I'm just never going to have wrap my head around. Like I've tried multiple records, and it's just it doesn't do it for me. Anyways,
Yeah, I mean,
I want to mention another one before we move on to the disappointments of the year, and that was one that was part of my list, and that it was Canon Fea. They're I don't know how familiar you are with them. They've blown up this year. They're a German black metal band that sings about World War One, and they're dressed like German World War One soldiers. First of all, I think it takes some courage to be a German band to take on this kind of I don't want to call it shtick, but this kind of theme to their music. So I think it takes some balls to do that. I mean, it's not World War II, it's World War One.
yeah,
So,
I was about to say,
but still, I mean, but still, there is. I think there's still a stigma around it, and not as much, obviously. So I still think it takes some balls. They blew up this year with their second record. They're touring right now across Europe with Panzerfaust, and every show is sold out. They're selling out everywhere. I think they're one of the most, they're not one of the most, they are the hottest black metal band right now in Europe. Everybody's talking about it. I know every time we check out one of their videos, the comment sections blow out with people like renting and raving about these guys. I don't know how other markets are going to receive it. But just to give you an idea, I don't know if you know this or not, they played at Summer Breeze this year. They outsold every single band merch wise.
wow. I mean, that's always a good sign. Like, I mean, the other bands that like seem to be on a similar kind of tick, and like when I saw them in London, like the lines for the merch was Ulcerate, and so they haven't really. I mean, they haven't really impacted the UK because I don't think they've really played the UK yet.
No, I don't think they have, and it's not part of this tour run either.
Yeah, well, we're not easy country to play at the moment.
No, no, the whole
But
Brexit thing is.
yeah, but I guess like the way they kind of overcome the any kind of stigma of being German World War One is that it feels like a really human approach. And you know, people like black metal doesn't always like have a story, but this band really have a story. Yeah, they have the two album covers are like really similar with the orange, so they've got this kind of like really strong visual uh theme going through it as well too. And yeah, it kind of really puts you in the action. Like I love all the they've got the whistles of going over the top of the trenches,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and there's a real kind of like an emotional um feel to it that at extremity's edge, that I think people can either relate to or like feel like vicariously, I guess. That yeah, even though in some ways it's fairly straightforward black metal, but there's this extra like emotional weight to it that kind of takes it over the edge, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at bands, and obviously Sabaton, when it comes to war and that kind of stuff, they're obviously the most popular one. But you can look at a band like 1914 from the Ukraine, who also,
Eastern Eastern Front from the UK.
yeah, they only do like that kind of music and stuff like that. But I think, like the fact that they're singing in German,
Mm.
they're not singing in English, they're singing in German about German soldiers in World War One. You always going to bring, I don't want to call it patriotism, but you always going to bring an emotional side of you that historical is going to be connected with whatever it is that you're singing about, because you are singing about your ancestors to a certain degree. And I think that's what moves the needle. Like you said, it's not like the sound is anything new that we haven't heard before, but I think
Mm.
that level that they add to the way the lyrics get transported through the music, through the vocals, that's what moves the needle, and I think that's what makes them so attractive.
Yeah, I mean, and also remember, like this album's coming in the wake of like, was it the Netflix movie All Along the West? I mean, the third
Yeah,
remake,
the remake.
second remake
Yeah,
of like All Along the Western Front, where that's from a German perspective, and they saw like, just the horror of war, and maybe that just feels quite apt, you know, in a country where like in a world where like, there's so many different war fronts going on at the moment, and it's really part of all our consciousness now, whether it's like Ukraine, Palestine, and then in the wake of like this incredible remake All Along the Western Front, um, where people got really invested into the this kind of combination of like something epic, but also just horrific, and just fearing for your life and that sense of duty and all those things put together.
yeah, and
And
I think there's from a German standpoint. I mean, I'm not German, obviously, so I can't speak for them, but the impression that I get is that you know it's a topic that Germans don't want to touch. Like when it comes to World War One, World War Two, I'm sure most of them would rather not talk about it. So it almost kind of becomes a taboo. And for these guys to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to sing about. We're not glorifying it. We're just telling stories of the people who were just like you and me. They were just people, and they
mm,
went through pain, suffering, death, all of these things. I think there is a little bit of taking it back, would perhaps has been taken away to a certain degree. So I think there's a little bit of that as well, a little bit of that
yeah,
opening up the veil of something that perhaps was a little bit taboo.
but also like people also had like a long, deep insight into it from that movie as well too. So you know that space had already been open to some extent, and turned into art, and they're kind of occupying. They've kind of taken up that space and made something really visceral out of it, and very sort of evocative. Like just so all those little sound effects that go on, they really give it an extra dimension. And they're not, and they're very subtle. Like they're quite low in the mix. Then it's not like a shtick. It's just part of the narrative that they're trying to tell. And
Yeah, they help you be transported into that place. So like
yeah,
you're not just listening to the music, now you're becoming kind of part of the music.
yeah,
I really love it.
I love the artwork. I love the fact that the two album covers go so well together. And, this new one, they've got Kaiser putting them through the grinder,
The
and
grinder, yeah.
yeah. So it's like, so it is saying that, and also now, we feel like we're at the mercy of like oligarchs and and you know trying to direct our lives and put through our own little grinder. So there is a kind of parallel to the modern world as well too. Like plus ça change, nothing. We're all at the mercy of these like of this kind of idiots and oligarchs and power hungry.
I feel like of all the trends that made a return, like the mullets and the bottom bell pants, dictators was not on my bucket list for returns, but it seems to be the case. Uh,
Yeah.
Moving on from best records, let's talk a little bit about disappointments. I picked one, you picked one. Actually, the one that you picked, it's mine as well, and that is Bruce Dickinson.
Yeah.
But I also want to throw Linkin Park into the mix. But let's talk about Bruce first. What were your expectations, and why do you feel like this record is a disappointment?
Um, I think the reason I feel this record is a disappointment, like, don't get me wrong, like I love Maiden. I will defend the most recent Maiden records to the death. And I've done this many times in the past. Um, I feel that I want to just be straight with it. It's the vocals. It's the vocals. They're like one. They're mostly like one key throughout. It's a kind of full stretch throughout, and it doesn't. And it doesn't allow the music to breathe when the music's trying to do something. Like there's a couple of songs like where he's trying to do the like American Gothic, like Rain on the Graves and Resurrection Men, and it doesn't have that kind of nuance that that kind of someone like Johnny or the gravitas that someone like Johnny Cash would have brought to it, or you know, and I felt like with those two songs when you're trying to do this Americana, it's really hard to do because you have to totally inhabit the voice. And I felt like the first Me and That Man album failed in this regard too. Whereas like you listen to someone like a band like Wovenhand, David Eugene Edwards, which is this weird thing of this Christian band that all black metal people love, and one of my favorite bands because he's so in the zone and so inhabiting, the voice. And I just feel that he doesn't have he doesn't allow himself the range to really make these songs come alive. And I feel like you can hear that in Face in the Mirror too. And I just feel like the music doesn't kind of cleaves too much to this kind of the way he's singing. It doesn't have enough kind of space to be. It doesn't have the kind of quite the epic nature that Maiden songs do. That's mostly my um take on it.
I
I,
don't disagree with anything that you said. I thought the album was mundane at best.
mm,
Um, I mean, if his name wasn't on the record, nobody would even talk about it. It's just there's nothing really special to say. But I don't know. I can't say that I'm. It's a disappointment, but I was not expecting much going in, if that makes sense. So for as disappointing as it is, I wasn't truly disappointed because I honestly was not expecting much going in.
yeah, I mean, you'd hope like he'd go a bit further off like the Maiden-esque paths, and and I feel like that last song, Shadow of the Gods, that's on the regular version of the album, and it tries to be really epic, but I feel like it's not quite deserved in the sense that there's not enough drama leading up to it to have this kind of really epic songs. I like these sort of gothic cult as in the band the cult guitar tones to it. But then it starts to kind of verge on the mawkish, and so he's going for this big epic thing at the end, but you haven't built up to it in quite enough for it to really hit home. And I just he does try to do a few different things with his voice on there, but I just feel like his voice is too stretched the whole time, and it's not allowing itself the elasticity and the sort of gravitas that it really needs to make these songs come alive.
So now the question that begs is, do you think he still has it in him vocally to pull it off, or he's doing the best that he can and he's just not for this kind of record is just not good enough?
I just think it's just the approach he took that he just right, I'm going to go full on Bruce and the vocals and not actually allow himself to maybe sing a little bit more. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like it's all just most of the way through, and but but the songs don't have that maiden gallop that makes you feel as if like you're bracing, running into the wind, and where those kind of vocals are really appropriate. It feels it doesn't quite the songs don't quite have the momentum to make those vocals really appropriate for what it's doing.
So the album that I put on my list was Linkin Park. I mean, Linkin Park has been also a story of the year because of their return. Have you had a chance to listen to the record?
No.
Well, the record is not very good. Let's put it that way. And I'm trying to be as kind as possible. But tying the record to the story of the year. At this point, I think it didn't matter what the record. I mean, the record could be an absolute steaming pile of garbage. It's just a reason for them to have some new songs, or a reason to do a tour or whatever you want to have it. Because at the end of the day, everybody's going to buy tickets for that freaking tour, and they're going to make a boatload of money. And they're probably only going to do two songs from the new record, and everything else is going to be the old hits. But are you surprised with this resurgence of Linkin Park? I thought they were dead and dusted, to be honest.
Um, I don't I don't begrudge them it. I don't I have no investment in Linkin Park. I'm too old for Linkin Park. When Linkin Park came out, I was listening to Obituary and Dareside, and I was listening to black metal, and just like I I was not an adolescent when it came out. I was like 30 when it came out, 30, 31 or something. I had no need for it. Like, I am really not the person to talk about it in it, to offer any insight into it on like any kind of emotional weight that they had when they came out. Like, I totally get that, they gave a voice to people who didn't have a voice, but I can't listen to anything adolescent these days. I haven't been able to listen to anything adolescent for like years. Once got past 30, I kind of found myself drawing a line in the sand. I find it hard to listen to the Smiths. I find it hard to listen to some Cure albums because I just find the these days, because I just found everything sort of quite, the whole tone sort of quite adolescent and a bit whiny. But that's not to take away anything from the emotional resonance I had for people, and people, you know, it gave them a voice, and more power to you. But at the same time, I like people mixing metal with things that don't belong in that don't necessarily belong in metal. But I just felt that this was a whole kind of like, when I say adulteration of metal, it I mean, I thought it was kind of quite, it's more like infantilizing, but you know what I mean? It was more just a watering down of metal in it, and I felt it was like kind of that point when you could say you listen to metal without having any investment in the 20, 30 years of metal that had gone before. Like, I just feel like bands like Linkin Park were kind of a year zero for people. And so that's why I hate the idea of gateway bands. Well, I don't really understand the idea of gateway bands because a people, how many people got into Linkin Park then got drawn into like Obituary and Dareside, and all the death
Attain.
metal. What's saying, yeah,
I don't see
and
that transition. How you go from listening to Linkin Park record, and then next thing you know, you're listening to Vatain and doing
no,
chorus spins.
and when we talk about gateway bands, we only ever talk about the gateways, not really about like the bands that there should be a gateway to. Like, people always talk about Linkin Park. It's not like, oh, well, you really should be listening to their side, or you really should be listening to Nile, or, you really should be listening to Mayhem. But this would be your first point. And so I just felt like the people who got into metal through Linkin Park was the first generation that really didn't seem to be that interested in metal as a kind of like a a narrative that stretched before then. And I totally get that.
Or
And
even the lifestyle of it, because metal is it's a subculture. So I don't see a lot of people who got into Linkin Park or System of a Down or any of those bands from that era, Korn. Um, they didn't go beyond the shoreline. It,
yeah, but I mean, to be my own devil advocate, it brought them into music that spoke to them and their lives. And so it's more like a kind of, it's not like anti-metal, it's more like a parallel world of metal that there isn't really much, there's nothing really porous that like you go back and forth between. I like bands that play around with like something sort of slightly poppy, metal bands. Like I really like Pill and Boo. I really liked Figure Number Five by Soulwork. You know, I even quite liked Route to Remain uh uh by In Flames, because you felt there was a sense of like they were discovering something, and you could feel like this kind of thrill of invention, especially in Route to Remain. Um, and but but when it, yeah, I don't know, just when it's all tied into like a sense of like your own kind of angst, I feel that's like kind of a dead weight. Sometimes that's not the thrill. That's something else from the thrill of invention, you know. And I totally get people. It spoke to people. I do not begrudge them it whatsoever. I just think it just opened up this parallel timeline of metal that we tend to conflate one with the other, and that leads to all kinds of you know, arguments and talks of gatekeepers and posers and all this kind of thing. And but they're just parallel timelines.
I like your view on the I never thought about it from that point of view, but I like that take of the parallel timelines. Now, the biggest story in metal this year was Gojira at the Olympics.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no bigger story this year. Are you surprised in any way that that they've been able to do that, and France as a country embrace one of their biggest exports music wise?
No, I mean, I still think it's like it was absolutely weird and ridiculous that when UK had the Olympics, we didn't have Maiden. You know, like for me, just that's weird not having Maiden for the Olympics. Um, you know, maybe not having Gojira for the Olympics would have been weird if you thought about it. But it was a total brilliant. It was such a perfect fit. You know, like the French are really good at the this kind of grand guignol epic. You know, really unself-conscious, over the topness. If you see their sci-fi or lots of other different things, you know, there's a certain very French viewpoint in that, and they totally fitted into it. And you know, I loved the whole kind of like I just thought the whole Olympics opening ceremony was amazing. Not just for that, but just the whole sort of vividness of it, the whole kind of sense of decadence of it, and the whole people getting completely the wrong end of the stick and thinking that the Bacchanal was actually the Last Supper. And oh my God, people are such idiots.
I know.
But
I was just going to ask you about that because the backlash that came after that performance, I was like, what's wrong with people these days? Like, I don't know. I think
yeah, like everything has to be a kind of like a cultural battleground rather than just like celebrating the thing in itself. And you know, this was a celebration in a way, you know, and it's something that we really need to, you know, rediscover. Like, you know, not having to be one thing because it's against the other. But but yeah, you know, Gojira have this sense of the epic that totally fitted into the ceremonies and you know the opening ceremony. And I was like really, I was, oh my God, so happy to see him there. And
do you
just
think other places will take this this hint now, and future countries hosting events like this will look at to some of their biggest rock metal acts and have them included?
um I don't know. I mean, who else has um those, you know, those standard bearers? I mean, you know, would I mean, you know, like Portugal, the biggest one is probably Moonspell, but if they you had the ones in Portugal with a Moonspell big enough, you know, if you know, if Norway had the Winter Olympics, would they have mayhem? I don't know. You know, the mind boggles. But it's just that, I mean, for England to have such a massive cultural export, like global export, like Maiden, and to completely overlook him was shocking. And to have uh a band like Gojira, who are not quite the same level, obviously, but well, it proved shocking in its own way, but it was just totally, but it was just like for
And I
that
think
for that ceremony, it was like totally symbiotic.
yeah, and
What
I
they
think the other thing about, to go to your point, for the Olympics, it's not like England is in as England. England is in as the UK. And if there's one symbol that it's goes hand in hand with Eddie and Iron Maiden, is the Union Jack. So for you to have the Olympics going under the UK banner and then not use them, I feel like that's a complete like
Yeah,
wasted
and then
opportunity.
I mean, it's impossible to watch Flight 666 without getting teary-eyed at the end of it or in the middle of it. When just what it means to people around the world in South America, particularly. And I always say if your parents would ask why you're into metal, you would play them Flight 666. Um, maybe um, French people explain to their parents like, Watch this is why I like metal," and you know, it can be a force for good as well as the darkest evil. But
Other stories from the year continue, since I mean since you brought up Iron Maiden, Deano passing, is I mean, his health hadn't been the best over the years. Obviously, you hope that the bad news never comes, but it ended up
who
arriving. How do you feel his impact on the band will be looked at in the future?
I mean, I mean, everyone was. I mean, start like he was about to tour when he passed away. It was just about to start tour. I had friends who were going to join him on tour for the work with him on tour. Um, so that's so it was still going right at the end. But the impact hasn't. I don't think it will. People were always aware of the impact he had, and his impact was always kind of retrospective in that what he was doing towards the end was cool. He was still going, but no one was paying huge amounts of attention to it. It's really just those two albums that are like part of our foundation stones, and it was really, really, strong part of it, and he'll always be remembered for that. And he just fitted in perfectly in those two albums, and I think after that, he was really trying to find his place and relevance after that. But his relevance will be um forever like etched in stone. And people said it's like this kind of mixture of like punk and metal. And I never really thought his voice was really that punky. Like there was still like a bit of a slight stain of blues in it. So I always thought his voice was always like he had that kind of proto metal voice. Like and so I really like records that are just like when something's in the process of becoming something. So when like sort of metal's kind of in the process of being formed and it's got this kind of slightly blue, this last bit of blues proto metal in it, and it's trying to transform into something else. And I always find like those records that in that transition period are like the ones that have the most kind of wild energy. And I always feel the same way about also Madness, where it's like when thrash are turning into death metal and there's all this wild energy that can't be contained. And Paul Di'Anno, he really embodied that kind of that wild energy where it didn't know what was going to be yet. But those are always the most exciting periods where there's you've got that rawness and you've got all this kind of potential and this kind of this wild break things down kind of feel to it. And then when you got that wrapped up in this world, this absolute vision that Steve Harris had, it was a perfect vehicle for like sort of containing this kind of wild energy that he had. And, you know, the same way that you go back to the beginning of black metal and just like it's that wild energy that people will always refer back to, and this is why I feel like when you don't have a kind of a sense of history of metal and a narrative, that you miss out on all this wild energy that was there at the beginning, and that you can draw from again and again and again, and to your own means. And and this is why I think it's really important to always remember your roots, because the roots are always like wild and chaotic and full of potential and visceral in their own right as well.
Man, you're so I could listen to you talk about this for days, honestly. Like I'm sitting back and I'm just soaking it all in. I'm not gonna say anything about it because then I'm gonna sound like a dumbass. So I'm gonna move on to the return of Black Dahlia Murder. Now, let me ask you this. I've had this conversation about the bands since the passing of Trevor. With my son, we've debated back and forth. His mind has always been set. Mine has fluctuated in terms of what I feel. Originally, I felt like the band should have just retired the name. They could come back as they are now, but under a different name, maybe take a title of a song and name themselves after that, something like that. My son was like, no, like if it wasn't Trevor and it was a guitar player or a drummer, wouldn't the band continue? And my answer was yes. And his point was, if that was the case, then why act any differently? So me and him have had this battle back and forth. What is your take, not on their return, but on their return in the shape that it took?
I would not. I would not like if they want to come back as Black Dahlia Murder, they can totally come. That's totally up to them. It's like there's a kind of like there's a defiance in coming back as Black Dahlia Murder, and there's a kind of a tribute to Trevor as well, that they're coming back as Black Dahlia Murder. Do you think? I don't know. I mean, we can only speculate about whether Trevor would be like, "How dare you use the name?" But I think you could maybe he'd also be like, "Well, I'm really glad they're continuing the name." And I think from their point of view, you know, they're totally honoring Trevor, and I think it should be taken as such.
Okay, but so let me throw this at you. Fans have embraced them. Okay,
Mm.
I've seen them. I've seen them twice now since Trevor's passing live. The embracement from the fans, not just from a ticket purchase point of view, because both times I saw them in Toronto, the shows were sold out. But even the merch, the lineup for them, like people really felt emotionally connected. And I felt like people wanted to give love back to the band to kind of allow them to rise from the ashes and be back on their feet. So you have that. And then you have Power Trip that has announced that they're going to be returning with a different singer. And the backlash from fans towards that has been massive. In my opinion, there's not a lot of differences between both, but how fans have reacted to both have been completely different from one another.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like both Riley and Trevor, they stood for something different. Like Black Dahlia were, they were a fun band. It kind of actually at the time, it kind of annoyed me that, they were kind of a death metal band that deliberately did non-death metal pictures and just always like goofing off in pictures. It's like, nah, nah, just like, I feel it's like, people wearing t-shirts say death metal and a nice cup of tea. It's just like, just like, so there was always, there was always a bit more levity in Black Dahlia Murder. But I think Riley stood for something a bit more political, I think, or a bit more not even political, but just like a way of life and an approach. It'd be like if Lamb of God came back, if let's just say Randy Blythe left the band, like it would be the same reaction if Lamb of God came back with a different singer. Like I think people were invested in Riley in a much more concentrated way, and that like a particular set of values that maybe he had, and that's much harder to pull off because he embodied them, and that's much harder to put off into a different singer. Who knows what the new singer might be like? He's got big shoes to fill, but there's some bands that I can't imagine them coming back with a different singer. Can you imagine Watain playing without Eric Danielson? Can you remember? Could you imagine Primordial without with someone taking over from Alan Averill? Just like no, there were artists that embodied a kind of perspective in a much more concentrated form than I felt that maybe Black Dahlia was kind of like more of a collective with um Trevor at the helm, but uh people are much more invested, I think, in yes, in a different way in singers like Randy Blythe or Riley, Eric Danielson, or what have you. Those kind of like, yeah, I just
I never thought of it from that perspective.
yeah, I just felt like Trevor, people had there was a lot of love for Trevor, and quite rightly so, but he wasn't quite the figurehead for something in the same way that Riley was. So I can see it's different.
So let's finish our conversation with Sleep Token. All right. So I don't know if you're a fan. I'm not. I'll be
No,
the first one to admit I'm not a fan.
no, I am
Are
no,
you surprised that they're headlining Download?
no. I'm not surprised. I mean, I actually think it's they're in some ways like the perfect headliners for Download as far as in what Download is now. But they need to they need to bring in new headliners. And you know if you look at the like all the lineup they've had over the last couple of years and last year in particular, they're moving away from that kind of legacy. They moved far from that legacy metal to more sort of like emo-y, or they've become much more sort of like whatever contemporary metal is these days. And they need to bring a new headline. And as much as I do not get it, I think it's like I find the whole thing really kind of a bit creepy. It's a bit like cuddly QAnon, in the sense that they'll drop these cryptic messages that mean absolutely fuck all. And I'm just going, oh my God, what does this mean? Just like, so
Comparing Sleep Token with QAnon is like the greatest thing I've heard in 2024.
cuddly QAnon, loved up, lovelorn QAnon. Where it's just like, everything's like this kind of cryptic message, and everyone's trying to decipher this message, but it's just like, really? All right, yeah, you go. But
But it has become a little bit cult-like because I
and
don't know if you
totally
read,
cult-like.
like the fans go mental trying to figure out who the people are, where they live. Like really, the fan base is kind of like a cult-like.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like there's this kind of weird hysteria that's being built around them that I don't. But you're either in it or you're not, and and if you're not, you're like, what? Um, and yeah, but I mean, I think it'll probably be spectacular. I think for all that, there's this kind of communal thing around them that makes them kind of headline fodder. I mean, we can talk about what it says about the state of metal, that this is considered a metal band, where it's just like a few watered down sugar riffs and sort of some modern pop, and just a bit lovelorn looking through the window sort of thing. None of which to me is any reason I ever got into metal whatsoever. But each to their own.
I
But
would rather go to a patriarchy show.
yeah. Oh yeah. I actually was wearing the t-shirt yesterday.
You introduced me to that band this year in Norway, and my life has never been the same.
Yeah, yeah. But so, again, not metal in any way, shape, or
No,
form,
no, not at all.
but there is a spirit of like outlaw. There's an outlaw spirit and a kind of like fuck everything spirit that they've got, and transgressive spirit that metalheads will get. And so for me, yeah. So for me, like, there's nothing that Sleep can do that is in any way is for me what the spirit of what I think metal is, or at the very least gives me some insight, different insight perspective on what metal can be. I quite liked Baby Metal at the beginning, not because I thought they're metal band, because they're not. But I quite enjoyed seeing metal through this kind of weird lens of like J-pop, and I didn't really feel like, when people trying to say this is a future metal, it's just like, no, it's not. It's a pop band, just putting metal through this weird filter that's kind of like bit nuts, and I quite enjoyed it. So I'm not like anti anything modern whatsoever, but I don't know, just to call it metal just because it has a few genty riffs when and a few masks. Uh, it's a very superficial idea of what metal is, but you know people love it. People are absolutely. I've had the, I wouldn't say misfortune, but I've had the experience of seeing them live once at Mystic Festival in Poland. And yeah, just the intensity in the room was quite intense. But it's a teenage intensity that I don't. My intensity is in other areas, really. You know, um,
I'm with you. I don't I rather do
but
something else with my time.
yeah, but I think for the profile that Download has, I think it's a really canny booking, and you know, just on putting taking my taste out of it, I actually kind of applaud them for taking that risk. And I don't even think it's a risk. I mean,
No, for them, I don't think it is. I mean, if you're talking about Hellfest doing it or Vakken or Summer Breeze, then I would say it would be a risk. But for Download, I feel, and if you look at the rest of the lineup too, I mean, makes sense.
yeah, yeah, I think so too. I don't know why there was any kind of sort of controversy over it. Downloads for some people now, it's less for other people. It's not really. I went last year to see so I really want to see Highland play. And if I could have stayed longer, one of my one of oh, no, that was Bloodstock, wasn't it? But yeah, I went. I'll go for like a day to see one or two bands. There's two or three bands usually I want to see over the course of the festival, but I'm not their target audience anymore. And you've got to bring new people into it, and it's still the biggest metal festival. Well, when I say metal, um, hard rock, heavy-ish metal aligned festival there is in the UK, and
Guitars.
yeah, and it's so it's an it's an institution, and I think that that's where you go to test out this kind of new wave of things that people are calling metal.
I couldn't have said it any better. Jonathan, man, thank you very much for your time today. It was a pleasure
Yeah, I
to
really loved it.
it was a pleasure to do this. We need to do this again next year. I'm sure we have
Yeah.
more
What
stories.
we didn't ask actually, what was your like? I haven't actually talked about my favorite album of the year, but
Oh, well, so what's your favorite album of the year?
so it was down between Blood Incantation and this other one, and always think I'm going to go with my head on my heart, and I went with my heart, and I went for Hamfeth, uh, the
Their
new
singer is
Hamfeth.
also in Yotun, which released Kinship, which is one of my favorite records
Yeah,
of
I
the
mean,
year as well.
my God, that voice. I mean, that
His voice
voice.
is like out of this world.
It's transcendent. It's like when it goes from the sort of the growls, and his growls are really good to the cleans. It's like it's pulling your spirit out of your body. It's like I remember I was watching Hamfest play a few years back with Michael Berbian from Season of Mist
Mhm.
we were at Midgard Block Festival, and he goes, "Oh," and he goes, "Ooh," and it's like we literally looked at each other just to say like we didn't just imagine that actually happened, right? But again, like you talk about an emotional journey, and to tie that voice in to so many different nuances and tremors, and just like a genuine organic like wave emotion waves, because it's all kind of set at sea, and but it's this wave of emotions that feels like really grandiose, but really human at the same time. And so this record is so vast and epic and so like human and alone against these elements. And it's just it literally the most beautiful record I've heard this year. And just, that I feel like that and Duel were the two records that just had their own organic sense of dynamics that were like purely on this own kind of internal emotional map that they unfolded so gracefully and like nothing predictable. But when it happens because it needs to happen. And just, yeah, just this really just finely tuned emotional barometer of just these little fluctuations that just like become the biggest things in the world. And at the end, so it's about, what the album's about. It's about this whaling disaster that happened in Faroe Islands in 1915, and three ships went down. Out of those three ships, one person survived. And at the end, they have the voice of the son of the survivor, and it's in Faroese. But the weatheredness in his voice and the wisdom and the history and the weight of everything, just like it's, the whole album is Faroese, but just the weight of it and the universality of it for such a, people have own feelings about whaling, but just the it just hits you like a rock, and then it just flows like, like the ocean, and it's just, oh my God, it's just the most beautiful, uplifting, take you through every stage of loss, recovery. Just, if you're feeling a little bit lost at sea over, what's been happening politically lately, this will take you through all the stages of grief and, you know, and recognize your humanity at the end of it. And so that was my album of the year.
For me, I mean I have an album of the year, but I would consider that to be more of my mainstream. It's such a weird word when it comes to metal, but I think my top 10 albums of the year would be considered more mainstream records. At the top of that list for me is Flesh God Apocalypse with Opera, considering the background of the story of that album and the impact that they've had by giving Veronica a lot more vocal predominance in the record versus previous albums. I just love how it really feels like a Greek tragedy, even though it's an Italian opera, if you know what I mean. But
Mm.
outside of that more mainstream metal sound, for lack of a better term, I would have to go with Groza. These th- Groza, and actually it's a toss up between Groza and Perchta. Perhaps Perchta would get the nod from me because it's folk, but it's black metal. But okay, but if you think about the kind of folk that they're singing and the kind of sound that they're creating, it's very tribal. It's very human at its core, from a tribal standpoint, like almost like the origin of mankind. But if you think about black metal, there's a lot of black metal in that, in that
Mm.
in that tribal aspect of how man has always had these different groups of people that created these tribes based on their were and they're part of the world and all of that stuff. And the
Yeah.
way that band brings almost a little bit of a Heilung feel and sound and atmosphere, infusing some more deep folk elements, and then cover all of that with a blanket of black metal. It was so intriguing to me. I was so taken back by their record that they released on Prophecy. I was just really mesmerized by their sound and mesmerized by their performance. And I think it's one of those albums because it's not on a massive label, so it may not get the same attention that some other records out there will get.
Yeah,
I
but
think it's a phenomenal record.
I think people who buy stuff off Prophecy, because Prophecy Productions is a boutique label, so I think people who are into stuff on Prophecy Productions will totally get it, and a lot of people, will buy stuff because it's on Prophecy. And yeah, I thought it was really elemental. And actually, the band I felt that I had the most kinship with was Arcona. was another like folk band that kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
been
from
going,
Russia. Yeah,
yeah, it's been going much more black metal recently, and it's got this kind of like stern, elemental, slightly heart heavy feel to it as well too. And also, you know, from a very female perspective. And so they don't sound entirely similar, but I just thought there were parallels, superficial, but
I agree
maybe other
with
deep
you.
parallels there that you know, it's also kind of tied to maybe the seasons, the elements, and you know, just the sense of landscape and where are they from in
Germany.
they, are they were they not Austrian?
I believe they're German. I mean, maybe some of the
They,
guys are Austrian, maybe some are German, but I thought they were German.
okay,
You
but
might be
yeah,
right.
yeah, but it certainly got that kind of like.
I mean, the
Well,
lines are kind of blurred, Austrian, Germans, you know.
yeah, but it's kind of like when they do the folky bits, it's like stern person on the hills kind of feel to it, you
Yeah,
know.
a
So
little bit of that.
it had a real kind of sense of place and sense of being outside as
I
well
agree.
too.
I agree.
Yeah,
Jonathan, like I said, thank you very much for your time, man. This was an
man,
absolute
it's been such a
pleasure.
pleasure. Loved
Thank you.
it.
I really appreciate you taking the time. I'll see you in April at Inferno.
Yeah,
We won't
yeah,
be doing the black metal tour bus like we did this year, but I'm sure we'll be getting ourselves in many more adventures.
I'm sure we will. That's what we're here for with the adventure.
I love it. I love it. Thank you very much, man. All the best.
All right, take care. Better. Till next time.